Start with the news that we've been following the entire back half of this week. A manhunt is still underway this morning for the gunman who killed prominent conservative activist Charlie Kirk. Authorities are now urging the public to help identify the shooter, releasing new photos and video of the suspect last night. The new surveillance footage shows a person running across the roof of a campus building, jumping to the ground, and then fleeing on foot. Authorities say the person left a palm impression as he climbed down, as well as a shoe impression when he landed on the grass. The suspect then crossed the street into a wooded area where law enforcement says they recovered a high-powered bolt-action rifle. The FBI is offering a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to the identification and arrest of the shooter. Utah Governor Spencer Cox spoke about the search for the suspect during a news conference last night.
We cannot do our job without the public's help right now. The public has answered our call for action. So far, we've received more than 7,000 leads and tips. I would just note that the FBI hasn't received this many digital media tips from the public since the Boston Marathon bombing. I would also just add a word of note for those people who are spending so much time on social media. I think Charlie said it best, that when things get bad, we should put our phones down and spend a little time with our families. There is a tremendous amount of disinformation. We desperately need some healing. We'll have more to say about that in the days and weeks to come. More than anything, we are going to catch this person.
You see the head of the FBI, Kash Patel, standing next to the governor in Utah there. Meanwhile, Vice President J.D. Vance and Second Lady Usha Vance traveled to Utah yesterday to meet with the family and friends of Charlie Kirk and to help bring his casket back home to his home state of Arizona. Vance, who was a close friend of Kirk's, carried the casket along with a group of service members as well as another staffer who was close with Charlie Kirk as it was loaded onto Air Force Two. President Trump, meanwhile, says that he plans to attend Kirk's funeral in Arizona when a service is held in the coming days. The president also announced that he will award Kirk the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Let me express the horror and grief so many Americans at the heinous assassination of Charlie Kirk have felt. Charlie was a giant of his generation, a champion of liberty, and an inspiration to millions and millions of people. Our prayers are with his wonderful wife, Eric, and his beautiful children. Fantastic people they are. We miss him greatly, yet I have no doubt that Charlie's voice and the courage he put into the hearts of countless people, especially young people, will live on. I'm pleased to announce that I will soon be awarding Charlie Kirk posthumously the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The date of the ceremony will be announced, and I can only guarantee you one thing, that we will have a very big crowd.
I want to bring in now NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, thanks for coming on with us this morning. What's the latest that you're hearing from your sources about the search for a suspect at this hour?
You know, there's not a lot of information. It was very clear from the press conference last night about who exactly this person is, where exactly they are. I think a lot is really up in the air right now. That was made clear. You know, the video that they put out shows sort of the pathway that the individual followed after jumping through the roof, and they have some general leads there. But those images that you're seeing on the screen aren't necessarily going to churn up anything in terms of like facial recognition. I think the best thing that they could do is release the entire video in as high quality as they possibly could, and that could really generate some potential leads there. Some people might recognize him or might recognize the shirt that he's wearing or some items of clothing, and that's sort of what they're hoping for now. But as we heard in that video, there's just so many tips that they're sorting through that it's really difficult, I think, to separate the good tips from sort of the junk there, and that's a task that is really enormous for law enforcement at this moment, Allie.
There's also just an obvious urgency to be able to find the person who did this, to get more information about what his motive could have been, what he did in terms of the planning, the security concerns, obviously, that will remain persistent and already existed in political circles around these kinds of events. But do you get the sense when they talk about rapid developments last night, but then don't have many tangible details to share, what kinds of things that they looking for at this point? What do you make of the fact that they're talking about a palm impression, a sneaker impression? Like, what does that actually do in terms of helping to find this person?
Yeah, I mean, like the shirt would be something that you could search for basically who manufactured that and then sort of work it backwards. That way, the shoe impression, I'm not sure that that does necessarily a ton other than, give you a shoe size, and it could help in, a potential prosecution eventually. But I don't know that that's going to be necessarily a lead that could generate a list of potential suspects here, just because you're talking about probably, a shoe that who knows how many of of those there are out there. So those sort of leads can be helpful, but in terms of identifying this individual, I think they really are relying on the public at this point and sorting through just a ton of information that's coming in about this. So obviously the hope would be that someone recognizes him or recognizes who this was, or maybe there was some sort of communication or someone who knew that they had a sort of some issues with Charlie Kirk and might be a suspect on this list. But those individual pieces of evidence that they collected could help for a prosecution down the line, but aren't necessarily I think going to generate an instant list of people who this could be.
Yeah, so we're going to, of course, keep watching that. I think the other question that I have, when you see that Kash Patel is on the ground, that Dan Bongino, the number 2 at the FBI, is also there in Utah, how typical is that? Because I know that for many in this administration, I think many of us have probably talked to folks in the White House, around the White House, who recognize this not just as a political news story that's being covered, but it's very personal for them as people who worked alongside Charlie Kirk. Certainly that goes for people like Kash Patel, who was very much in the conservative media ecosystem before coming into the FBI. So how typical is it for someone like that to be on the ground for an investigation like this?
Yeah, I mean, we're in really sort of just uncharted territory here in terms of, it's normal for an FBI official to respond to these events, and something this high profile, you could certainly see that. I think just the only issue that normally ethics of folks, I think within DOJ or within the FBI, career ethics folks would have been warning about had they still been in their positions, is that this could create some complications down the line just because of those close relationships. I think, immediately what any defense attorney is going to be looking at is whether this was handled differently or whether, a jury pool was tainted. Not that those issues are necessarily going to prevent, a conviction eventually, but I think that that's something that they would be looking at, those close relationships, and whether, people should have been sort of taken out or let this to other officials. Obviously the problem there is that recently the top FBI official in that area was sort of pushed out of the Bureau. So there's just a lot of general chaos. And of course, all of this focus on immigration that the FBI has been doing recently that does create some complications for the federal investigation.
So, of course, we are tracking the ongoing manhunt, the ongoing investigation, but the fallout is broad, I think, to this story, because a number of historically black colleges locked down campuses, canceled classes, and ordered students to shelter in place after receiving credible threats of violence yesterday. Many of the precautionary measures are no longer in effect. The schools did not provide details, but all said they were working with local law enforcement. Alabama State University, Clark Atlanta College, and Virginia State University were among those affected. The FBI called those incidents a hoax, citing no information to indicate a credible threat. House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries released a statement on the threats, calling them, quote, despicable, and yet another indication that the explosion of hateful extremism is out of control. I mean, that's the tenuous thread between these stories, Ryan, right, is the feature of violence in not just politics, but throughout educational institutions. Of course, we too often cover school shootings. But in terms of these specific threats, what more are we hearing about them? And what does it say about the state of affairs in this country right now?
Yeah, I mean, things are obviously sort of at a boiling point, and I think the rhetoric has been really extreme for several years. In the The FBI has determined that these appear to be hoaxes. So thankfully, it doesn't appear that these are necessarily active threats. But they're certainly something that don't make people feel comfortable, and it contributes to this sort of world that we're in terms of extremism and in terms of just fear amongst people taking part in the public discourse.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the fearful fallout as it's parlaying itself on Capitol Hill a little bit later in the hour with a Democratic member. For now, we'll leave it there. NBC's Ryan Riley, thank you for joining us. And still ahead.